Okay, so this week we're going to be covering in MBA 2, Chapter 2 of Level 2. Chapter 2 of Level 2 has a lot of formulas in it. So I wanted to spend some time just going over a few things so that you can anticipate and hopefully better understand what we're covering this week. I'm actually going to divide the chapter into two because there are so many advanced formulas. I want to just focus on some this week and then we'll focus on more next week. So for this week, we're going to just be doing the first part of the chapter, working through the range names, count if, sum if, and average if. And the next week, we'll move into the lookup functions and the rest of the functions that are covered in the chapter. So what I wanted to do is just spend a little bit of time reminding you of range names. So in this particular case, they have you coming in here and making some changes. So right now mine looks a little different. If you open up your file, mine is completed already because I'm opening up the file as it's finished. So this is what yours is going to look like when you're all done working through the first part of the chapter. So just a reminder, range names are there to make it easier for us to use a certain amount of cells, certain cells and formulas. So I clicked on the claim estimate. Instead of saying H4 through H24, I can do claim estimate instead. Or I can use driver number instead of E4 through E24. This also allows for us to not have to use absolutes in formulas. So if you remember, when we want to copy a formula, we have to put the dollar signs around the cell reference, and we don't need to do that when we're using name ranges. So that's another positive to using name ranges. So the first thing the chapter has you do is it reminds you when you want to change anything or do anything with your name ranges, you can go into the name manager, you can delete, you can edit, and all those things, which you'll do in the first part of the chapter. The next part of the chapter is going to cover what are called the next section is going to cover a count if. So I just want to go over the count if formula, keeping in mind that we're using name ranges in here, so it can be a little confusing sometimes. So I'm going to actually open this formula so you can see. So again, you're going to be doing this from scratch when you're working through it, but I want you to think of the count if as, if you think of it this way, you're going to count something if it meets a specific criteria. That's what you're doing with the count if. Count it if it meets a specific criteria. So in this particular case, they're telling you to count, look at the rep shop. So we're looking at cells I4 through I24. Again, instead of saying rep shop here, we could do I4 through I24, but we're using the range name instead. We're saying look at all of those and find all the occurrences of A+ paint and body. And we can, again, this isn't very many cells, we could visually see that, but if you could imagine a worksheet with hundreds of rows of information, you wouldn't be able to do that. So I can see here that my result is 3. It tells me before I come out of here. The biggest thing that's really important when you do this is to make sure you type this in correctly. If you spell anything wrong, it's not going to find your results. So that's something to keep in mind there as you're doing this formula. So click OK. You can see it found 3 options. The next formula they have you do is the same thing, count if, rep shop. So we're going to count it if it meets the criteria in K5. So now instead of typing in A+ paint and body here and maybe taking the chance on typing a typo of some sort, we're just going to click on a cell that includes the criteria. So we just clicked on K5 here instead of typing in JFJ auto. So that's the difference between this one and the one before. Again, count if, look at these cells and count all the occurrences of JFJ auto. There's 9 occurrences. That's the count if function. So you'll do that with these first 4 here. Then you're going to move on and you're going to learn the sum if. And I'm not doing this in order of the book, sorry. I'm just going to go through how it kind of appears in here. Sum if is the same thing, except it adds an extra piece to it. You're going to sum it if it meets a certain criteria. But the piece that you're adding is you have to tell it what to sum. So again, we're looking at the rep shop, I4 through I24. We're telling it to sum it if it meets the criteria of K4. In K4, we have A+ paint and body. And then we're telling it to sum the claim estimate. right here. So again, we could have, instead of rep shop, we could put in I-4 through I-24. Instead of criteria, we could type in A+ paint and body. Instead of claim estimate range name here, we could type in H4:H24. But again, we're using range names. We're using all of these options to help eliminate how easy it is to type something in wrong and not be able to get the correct answer just because of a typo. So again, the SUMIF is adding another component in that it's still the very first part of it is the same. We're saying, look at this range of cells, compare it to this criteria. If it meets that criteria, then sum what's in the cell. So it's going to add them all together. So all of the claim estimates for A+ paint and body are added up here. And if you went through and you added those, you would see that they would equal the 16,656. So that's the SUMIF. Same thing here. We're just using we're using JFJ Auto instead. So again, we're saying look at the repair shop, compare it to JFJ Auto. If it meets JFJ Auto, then add the claim estimate. We can see that here. So that's the SUMIF. COUNTIF just counts, SUMIF sums. So that's why we had the third option for the SUMIF. AVERAGEIF, very much the same thing. So let's look at this formula. Very much the same as the sum, except it's averaging instead of summing the information. So in this particular case, we're looking at the rating. So we're telling it to average the rating, we're telling it to average the claim based on the rating. So this time, the rating is, we're looking at this column. We're saying, look at the rating. If it meets criteria 1, average the claim. We want to know all of the ratings of 1. What are the average claims for the rating of 1? So in this case, we could have typed in cell K16, but it's not difficult to type 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So the average if is very similar to the SUMIF. It's saying, look at this range of cells. If it meets this criteria, average this range of cells. Hopefully that makes sense. So that's what all of these are here, the average ifs. Now the next thing then that you get into is not just the count if, it's count ifs. So it has to meet multiple criteria in order for it to be counted. So let's look at this option. You can see we just have a second criteria range here. So our first criteria range is the rep shop. So again, we're saying look at all the rep shops, compare it to K10, which is JFJ Auto. So look at this range of cells, find JFJ Auto. Then we're going to tell it to go to the criteria of the claim estimate, and the claim estimate has to be greater than 5,000. So now it's meeting two criteria. It has to be JFJ Auto, and the claim estimate has to be greater than 5,000. And we have five different results for that. So if we just did a quick roll down here, it has to be greater than 5,000. Oh, here's JFJ Auto greater than 5. JFJ Auto greater than 5. That's 2, 3, 4, 5 here. So we can visually see that again quickly. But the ifs, the count ifs with an S, gives us multiple options that we can compare together. So it had to meet both options in order for it to be counted. So that's the count ifs. Count ifs. Same thing here, count ifs. We're doing claims with a rating of greater than 3. So again, it's the rep shop in JFJ Auto in this case, and now we're looking at the ratings that are greater than 3. So it has to meet both criteria. We're counting it if it's JFJ Auto and it's greater than 3, then it's counted in our number of 5 here. So that's the count ifs, multiple criteria there. Same thing down here, average ifs. So it just has multiple averages here. So we look again at the average range. We're telling it to look at the claim estimate. Or I'm sorry, the average range is what it's going to be averaging. So that's the claim estimate. The first criteria, so this kind of appears a little backwards than what we were seeing some of the other ones. The first criteria range, we're telling it to look at the rating, and if it's a rating of 2, count it. And if the driver number is 1. So if the driver number is 1 and the rating is 2, we want it to average its claim estimate. So that's average ifs. If the rating is 2, the driver number is 1, then it's going to take the claim estimate and average that number to get the 6,000 formula result here. Same thing for the last one here, average ifs. It's going to take the rating, it's going to, again, the average range. What are we averaging is the claim estimate. The criteria range is rating. Or, I'm sorry, the first criteria range is the rating of a 3. The second criteria range is driver number 1. So if it meets both of those, it's going to average the claim estimate. So that's average ifs. In this particular chapter, we don't see an example of sum ifs, but you can have the same thing. If you had multiple options for the sum if, it would look very similar to the average if. Except that instead of being average up here, it would sum it instead, but it would look very similar to the same example here. So that's basically what we're covering for this week. You're going to be working through, let me just look in the book here quickly, pages 34 through 43. It's not a lot of pages, but a lot of formulas, and I just want you to be able to practice that and understand these before we move on to the next formulas. And your assignments for this week will only involve these count if, average if, sum if, and then the count ifs, average ifs, sum ifs, and then possibly some changes in the range names. I can't remember if that's part of the homework or not. But we're focusing on these formulas this week, and then next week we'll get into the VLOOKUPs and other formulas that are included in the chapter. Hope you're doing well. Let me know if you have any questions. Take care.